everybody. I'm Alyssa from Meditative Astrology. Today we're going to walk through the astrology of April 26th through May 2nd. Venus has a lot to say this week. We're going to talk about all of that and a little bit more. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, before we get started, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that way you don't miss anything that we have going on here. These weekly videos, they come out every Saturday morning ahead of the week so you can contemplate and reflect on what is coming ahead. And then we have live meditations Sunday nights, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Those are live astrologically guided meditations where the goal really is to take the astrology, take the transits that we speak of within the weekly video and what is upcoming, and really bring it down to a personal level. So we start out with a conversation about some of the loudest aspects of the week. We talk about them, we look at them maybe from a couple different angles, and then we go into that quiet contemplative space where we can really lean into the energies in our own personal way. We can reflect on how we might see them playing out, we can ask questions, and we can create that personal conversation and relationship with the astrology that is going on, because the transits are above all of us, yes, but they are affecting our lives and showing up and symbolizing very different things for each one of us based on our circumstances, our lives, our birth charts, and everything that we have going on. So, yeah, follow here on YouTube. If you find us on social media, Facebook and Instagram, that's where other miscellaneous posts and announcements are shared. Sometimes there's changes to the meditation schedule. That is all on social media, Facebook and YouTube. There's a weekly intention that's released on Fridays that is astrologically guided, that goes specifically with the weekly meditation that we have on Sundays. So really the goal is to give you a process, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, to prepare for the upcoming week. And again, bring that astrology down to the personal level and make it much more intimate, much more meaningful with what is going on directly in your own life. So with that being said, let's get together on all of the things and walk this astrological journey together. So let's go ahead and get right into this week here, shall we? We start out on Sunday, April 26th, with a couple aspects going on. Mercury from the sign of Aries is going to be squaring Jupiter in the sign of Cancer. Anytime you have these two planets coming together, there are questions that are being asked. Mercury likes to ask questions. Jupiter likes to give us knowledge, information, understanding. So the question and the answer are both highlighted and illuminated here. Questions asked about growth, progress, learning, and understanding. Themes of individuation and connection, specifically with these two planets being in Aries and Cancer. There are sensitive spaces that are amplified in the sign of Cancer. And with Jupiter moving through that space for us since last year, a lot of us have been learning different perspectives, different insights, different things have been coming up with us related to sensitive spaces. Places of which we've come from, our emotions, our conscious and unconscious conditionings, the relationship that we have with our ancestry and our family that has come before us, as well as our own personal history of our lives. Cancer reaches into those tender, sensitive spaces of nurturing, and for a lot of us, some of these spaces are very loaded, very, very loaded spaces. So Cancer, being the place of the moon, is a place of connection, right? Connection to our ancestry, connection to our body, to this physical incarnation, connection to our emotions, and all of these Cancerian things that we have mentioned. So what type of spaces do our sensitivities put us into, right? If we look at our connections and our own individual connections to those different connections that show up in the sign of Cancer, we may look at how it affects us individually from these more maybe communal, group, or origin type spaces, right? So themes of individuation and the spaces where we can step out and create our own path, and how that relates to the spaces where we've come from. It only seems like a natural process that, when you are individuating in some way, then you are needing to step away from some sort of connection. So thinking of, somebody that might be going away from home to attend college, right? So they're going to live elsewhere where maybe they've lived home with their family. This is just an example, and it can be extrapolated many different ways, of course. But if you have somebody who is, individuating themselves, and they are going off to college for the first time, and they are going to be living separate from their family for the first time, there's a level of individuation, there's a level of initiation, and striking their own path. No matter the connections, no matter how close or, not close the connections are with their family, there is a level of separation there on some level. Even if they talk all the time, they are still physically separated in some sort of way. So that is just one small example of the individuation and connection theme that could be coming through here. Again, Cancer connects us through the moon, and Aries, being Mars, wants to go its own path. So it separates in some way. Both of these signs individuate. They are both cardinal signs, and they they both initiate and start things, but in different ways. Aries starts and initiates from fire, from passion, from ideas coming into form, where Cancer starts and initiates from that emotional space, from the tender, sensitive spaces of nurturing, caring, and all of those Cancerian themes that we have mentioned. When you have fire and water, emotions can run very quickly, and we can act on things that feel very passionate and very fiery within us, whether that's for better or for worse, very, very quickly here. On a positive note, I'm thinking about support to help us grow. Okay, insights, learning, messages, resources may be coming through here. Support to help us grow. Jupiter in the sign of Cancer. Cancer, again, being the place of the moon, is the place of growth. It's very fertile. It's the place of the mother and of the womb, and the place where things grow and proliferate. We have Jupiter and we have the moon being the rulers of the sign of Cancer. So there is support to help us grow. I think about the process from Aries to Cancer, and in Aries, things are started and they're initiated, they're kind of dropped into form, and then there's physical resources and physical support that come along in the sign of Taurus, and then we can open up in Gemini to the mental realm, where we start to have ideas and brainstorming, we start communicating, and then there's the emotional aspect and support, right? So like emotional maturity in some sort of way can be looked at here within that first quadrant of the zodiac. So support to help us grow, right? Insights, learning, messages, and resources all coming through Mercury. Mercury is the messenger god, and Jupiter is the teacher. So, when it comes to the square and lessons and insights and messages and learning, if we are not listening to the messages, then it may need to come through stronger. And this is where the square comes into play, right? Spaces to grow from, spaces that make us just uncomfortable enough to where they make it's scratchy. It makes us want to move. It makes us want to be in a little bit different space. Move forward, move backward, move a lateral move, whichever direction it may be that we are needing to go. Support to help us grow, perhaps looking at where there's a lack or inadequacy of some way. Do we have support? Do we have the support from our family? Do we have the emotional backing to go in the direction that we are trying to go? These are questions of the square between Mercury and Jupiter, but specifically through these signs that we are looking at this lens. The other thing I think about when I think about Mercury and Jupiter is imagination coming into play with these two planets. Our ability to expand beyond the current space or paradigm, okay? So Jupiter is the planet of expansion, abundance, learning, wisdom, understanding, right? It takes us to another perspective or another level of understanding, right? Maybe we are able to step back to see a little bit of the fuller picture while still being immersed within the full picture. That's a little bit of a Pisces, Sagittarius thing, which are the Jupiter-ruled signs. So when we expand beyond the current understanding realm, space and time, whatnot, with Jupiter, then the understanding, the perspective shifts and changes. Mercury is the planet that often can hold two things at one time that are opposites and find a way that they can coexist in some sort of way. So it takes some sort of imagination or vision to be able to take yourself to another realm, right? You need to be able to open your mind. You need to be able to expand. Imagination can come into play here. Our ability to expand or a vision to start new or create, since these are the cardinal signs that initiate. Again, they initiate in different ways, but they both initiate. Although this is a square and we're talking about Aries and we're talking about Cancer, which is another cardinal signs, again, starting and initiating things, I'm still wondering about a level of fluidity here. Fluidity, because when I think about Mercury and the moon, I think about the shifts that they make, and they shift more than the other planets do, right? Mercury changes its phase more often and comes into conjunction with the sun more often than any of the other planets. We know that because we get Mercury retrograde, which sometimes feels like it's every other week, every other month, but it's more like every few months. And the moon changes her face day to day, right? We can go through a full lunar cycle in about 28 days. So both Mercury and the moon shift their faces and their expression more often than the other planets do. So there's a level of fluidity, or again, that imagination, that possibly taking us from one paradigm to another or one reality to another. You have that with the moon and with Mercury. So I'm wondering if we are challenged to see a way of flow, of shift. Think about how the lunar cycle flows, right? It's very slow and it's very subtle, but it's very impactful at the same time. If you go out and look night after night, you will notice that there is a change and a shift within the light of the moon. But if you just go out just one night and then the next night and no other, adjacent nights around that, you might not notice the shift quite as much because it is subtle in these small increments, but the overall picture is a little bit bigger and a little bit more grand. When we talk about the imagination, Venus comes into a sextile with Neptune this same day here. I'm going to go ahead and put the chart up so that way you all can see that here. All right, there we are looking at the chart here. You can see that Venus is in the sign of Gemini at 3 degrees, and she is making that sextile to Neptune. If you bop down a sign, you'll see Jupiter at 18 degrees of Cancer, and then Mercury's at 18 degrees of Aries here in this chart as well. So when I think about that aspect between Mercury and Jupiter, and then I think about this neat little sextile that we have between Venus and Neptune, it feels to me like this amplifies that imagination, that creativity, and the vision aspect of these planets coming together. I could see us really being able to expand our view and our understanding of things, or at least feel called to do so, even if things aren't quite clear at the time because of the square and because of the aspect to Neptune. And Neptune can make things a little bit foggy or a little bit nebulous sometimes. But both of these planets coming together, Venus and Neptune, are very romantically inspired. They can imagine up some of the most comfortable and romantic and inspiring stories that you could ever hear when they are coming together. Venus and Gemini, fresh off of that conjunction with Uranus, really wants to explore curiosities. She wants to ask questions in the sign of Gemini and move in multiple directions. Neptune allows a dissolution. So again, that idea of being able to expand yourself beyond a certain the current paradigm or space or realm or reality that you are in, you have to be able to separate yourself or let go of that in some sort of way. There has to be a little fluidity, like we mentioned, and there also has to be a way in which boundaries or walls or very rigid things have to be able to fall away. So we can get that amplified with Neptune here. I see this as another level of flexibility and fluidity, to see another perspective, to create, to initiate, and initiate from an inspiring, passionate place. That's Neptune in the sign of Aries. Neptune in Aries, we've talked a lot about it over this year. And it's very inspiring, but it's inspiring from a passion, from a drive, from some sort of fire that is burning within us. The sextiles, excuse me, sextiles are not always loud. However, this may feel very flowy and fluid along with the Mercury-Jupiter square that we have, even though the Mercury-Jupiter square may be a little bit louder than this aspect. So that's where we have coming through Monday. I can see it being very expanding, very opening in the beginning of the week here on Sunday. So that's where we start out the week. And if we move forward into Monday, we don't have any exact aspects, so we're going to follow the moon around, no exact lunar aspects either. Remember that when I look at lunar aspects, I look at the major aspects. I look at the conjunctions, the oppositions, and the squares, so there could be more minor aspects that are happening there. And then if we go forward into Tuesday, April 28th here, again, Venus is activated and aspect. She has a lot to say to us this week, and she's really going through quite a bit of a space, quite a bit of a couple different spaces here this week. The moon starts out in Virgo, moves into the sign of Libra, which is one of Venus's signs. And at that time, Venus is going to be making a trine to Pluto while she's squaring the lunar nodes. Let me go ahead and put that up here so you can see that too. I'm going to go ahead and roll this chart forward a couple days here so that you can see Venus here at 5 degrees of Gemini. She's making a square to both of the nodes, the north node in the sign of Pisces and the south node in the sign of Virgo. So this is going to echo back to the eclipses that we've had and the finality of that. And then she's making a trine, an air trine to Pluto in the sign of Aquarius here. When Venus is trining Pluto, she's digging deep down. She's digging deep down to explore, to expand, and understand. Venus moves into the underworld when she comes into contact with Pluto. But this is a trine, so it's expanding and it's coalescing and bringing things together, right? Expanding our understanding in an air sign. So thoughts, communications, words, perceptions, all of these things, Venus might really be digging down deep into. Air wants to understand and it wants to communicate. Venus is in the evening star phase, so she's speaking from experience, from history, from the spaces that she's been in. There is a past, there is a history, there is karma that has been accumulated in some sort of way. Pluto really enjoys bringing things up from the depths, so bringing things up that have been repressed, things that we have not necessarily dealt with, things that have a history in some sort of way. It doesn't have to be all bad things. It can be a power or a bravery or a courage that is coming up from within us in some sort of way, from our experiences, from our history, from the spaces that we have found ourselves in previously to this. There can be intensity around communications, ideas, power struggles can come into here, but really just wanting to, if there's power struggles, I'm wondering if it's about more of a like ideals and ideologies, right? So our thought processes that we're having, if there's like any sort of struggles here, then it might be that there's a couple different thought processes that aren't quite lining up. However, I wonder if with a deep, intense conversation, since this is a trine, if we can come to an understanding or we can come to appreciate another view or perspective in some sort of way. And at the same time, Venus is squaring the lunar nodes. So this brings up the eclipses that we've been in and also amplifies that history and experience and, you know, what has come before this moment, that coming back up. So that comes in a couple different ways. That comes up through just a general aspect of Pluto. That comes up with Venus being in the evening star phase versus the morning star phase. And then in interacting with the nodes at the same time, the nodes are the history of where we've been, where we're going. eclipses have our lunar cycles that have a much longer reach and longer longevity than, like a regular lunar cycle that just lasts, about a month. These cycles last about 18 months as far as how long the nodes are in a sign. So we get about 1.5 to 2 years of eclipses. But then you can look back to 9 and 18-year cycles as well, for the times that the nodes were in these signs, either in the same position or in reverse position. So there's a history, right? There's experience, there's things that have come before it here. So Venus might really be digging into what has come before and the experiences and the history here to move forward. How do we move forward? That is a question when a planet is squaring the nodes. It may feel like a crossroads in between destinations of some kind. Think about the recent Uranus transition, right? From Venus's sign of Taurus, where they came into that conjunction right at the very last couple, just right at that last degree, the last minutes of these two planets being in that sign. And then they transitioned essentially together. Venus moved in and then Uranus moved into Gemini. So between the physical realm and the mental realm in some sort of way, it might feel like a tug and a pull, because the North Node pulls us towards things, the South Node asks us to release, to relinquish, to let go, and holding the tension of those things and not falling, not allowing the pendulum to swing too far in one direction of either the North Node or the South Node, can be a difficult dance. It's like the tide of the ocean that is constantly moving and coming in with the waves, right? Sometimes it's really, really far out. Sometimes it's really, really far in. There's some times that you can predict where about it will be, based on the tide movements, but there's waves and, boats and other things that kind of play into where the shoreline and the waves are at the moment and how rocky they are and whatnot. So it's not always within our control, right? The eclipses and the nodes are kind of like that as well. Aspects to the nodes aren't always the loudest. However, we have Venus making that transit to Pluto at the same time, right? So this may amplify or bring a focus into kind of like the past, present, future type situation and type analogy. So Venus comes through and really, really digs in these first couple degrees of Gemini. And again, really wanting to understand, really wanting to expand the mental realm and, to approach things curiously. So it's like, if we're trying to figure out where the crossroads are taking us, it might be that we're curious in both, right? We're curious of both the South Node and the North Node at this time. So finding that balance can be a little bit more of a struggle sometimes. So that's where we are at with Tuesday. And then if we go forward and move into Wednesday, we do not have any exact aspects here either. We'll follow that Libra moon right through the day. Moving forward to April 30th, no exact aspects either. The moon will move from Venus's sign of Libra into Mars's sign of Scorpio, and that's going to set us up for our Scorpio full moon that we have coming through on Friday. So let's go ahead and move forward. We start off May 1st with a bang of a Scorpio full moon. The Scorpio full moon we always get when the sun is in the sign of Taurus, right? So within the springtime in the Northern Hemisphere, or within the zodiacal story, we get this reflection moment. Full moons are always reflection moments because they're at the height of the cycle, right? It's at the culmination. The moon has been gaining its light, it has come into full illumination, and it has, once it's fully illuminated or fully lifted, we could say, it's once you're all the way at the top, there's nowhere to go but down, right? And the cycle repeats itself over and over. So a reflection moment of growth, Venus's earthly sign of Taurus, and decay. Mars's water sign in the fall season, right? So we have spring versus fall. We have the two solid signs that hold these seasons very, very strongly. So if you think about springtime, where there's growth and proliferation and coming together and unity, Scorpio is the middle of fall, where there's things that are dying, there's decay, there's, rotting matter and things that are composting, and there's wetness from rain and snow and moisture in the air that could be accumulating. Maybe you live someplace where leaves fall off of the trees and you have matter that is physically accumulating. on the earth. This is much more emblematic of the Scorpio archetype, where springtime is much more conducive and symbolic of the Taurus archetype here. So unity, separation, death and or growth and decay. This is Venus versus Mars here, right? And again, holding the solid, the middle of these seasons where those qualities can be seen growing the strongest. So Scorpio season, from the Northern Hemisphere perspective and from the zodiacal story perspective, you know, dark is increasing at its strongest rate. Things are getting darker, things are getting colder, things are getting wetter, right? Things are starting to decay more. You have the opposite in the sign of Taurus. At the time of this full moon, I'm going to go ahead and put the chart up here again for you. Let me go ahead and just roll my chart forward here. All right, I fibbed. 2 p.m., not 2 a.m. Let me go ahead and put the chart up here. You can see we are awfully close to the full moon. This is just moments after the full moon here. So we have 1:22 p.m. Eastern time. Again, translate that to your own time zone. So you can see the sun and the moon across the Taurus-Scorpio axis here. If you take a look at where Mercury is in the sign of Aries, Mercury is conjunct Chiron at this time. Now, I don't always talk about Chiron necessarily, but when we have Mercury, which has something to say within this full moon, because the sun is in the sign of Taurus, which is Venus's sign, and Venus is in Mercury's sign. So Mercury does have something to say about this aspect. It's in conjunction with Chiron at the time. Chiron is the wounded healer that indicates a wound or a level of healing on some level here. So maybe thought processes around things that have come up in the past. So Chiron can be that wound that is difficult to heal, but it is not the ball and chain that we have to carry around for the rest of our lives, right? It can be the space where we can find the most intense healing, understanding, and compassion for ourselves and for others through our experiences, through our lived hardships in some sort of way. So this level of decay and understanding the deeper watery things of Mars in the sign of Scorpio feels like it's amplified or echoed by Mercury conjoining Chiron at the time of this full moon. If we make note that the moon is in its fall in the sign of Scorpio, it's exalted in the sign of Taurus where the sun is. There's no planet that is exalted in the sign of Scorpio, right? It is said that no planet can be lifted up where the moon, which is fortune or circumstances and events, is depressed. Because if life sucks, then it's really, really hard to have anything else lifted up. We'll just put it straight out like that way, right? So there's nothing exalted here. So there is this way, since the moon is in its fall, and moon represents life, circumstances, fortune, is depressed here, and we don't have any planets that are exalted. We have a domicile rulership, which is Mars, which brings us the separation principle. There is this way in which Scorpio feels like it needs to reach a level of finality, completion, or resolution to really reach its true form. So if the moon represents life and birth and creation, the body, if it's depressed here, and then we get death, we get decay, we get things that are falling away, right? So you get a space where it feels like a life cycle has been exhausted, and now we are exploring the remnants or the leftovers in some sort of way. This is what you can get with the Scorpio full moon. And then with the conjunction to Chiron from Mercury, it could really play in our mental sphere, as well as have us working through things mentally. So processing things are extra loud with this full moon that we have coming through. Before the full moon becomes exact, you know, that Scorpio moon is going to make a square to Pluto. Venus, who's ruling the sun, has made the square to Pluto this week. So reaching deep down to find power, to find strength, to find healing, to maybe resolve things that have been lingering for some time feels like a theme of this week here. But really the idea of the life cycle being exhausted and running its course feels important here. So then you have the water space of Mars. Mars like is willing to separate, to individuate, to go out on its own, to remove things that no longer work, right? So it's like to go in from the fall into the winter time, you need to get rid of the excess. You need to get rid of the things that are not serving anymore. This can be the space that we can find in the sign of Scorpio. Scorpio can also be very loyal, very dedicated, and it can stick with something, right? Like Scorpio is very investigative and doesn't necessarily want to give things up. So it's loyal to people, it's loyal to situations, it's loyal to thought processes. This is where we can say that Scorpio can get a little bit excessive if it's, in a shadow expression or something like that. So interesting full moon, considering what Venus is going through this week. She may really feel some level of empowerment coming through here this week to deal with some of the harder, deeper, taboo or untalked about things here. So that's where we are Friday. And then if we go ahead and move forward into Saturday, I'm going to go ahead and put this back up here. We move forward into Friday, May 2nd here, and Mercury moves into the sign of Taurus. So moving from the fast, fiery cardinal sign of Aries, we're slowly starting to break up the personal planet stellium that we've had in the sign of Aries as planets are moving on to Taurus. Venus has made her way into Gemini, obviously. Mercury, our mind, thoughts, communications, perceptions, may start to move a little slower. Things may seem a little more process-oriented, or we're thinking things through a little bit more. Maybe there's things feel a little bit more stable. Again, it's that solid, fixed sign, the stable sign of spring. So maybe things are growing and proliferating very steadily and very consistently in some sort of way. The unity principle, it's unity-oriented versus the separation principle, which is where again, that's Venus versus Mars, Taurus versus Aries. And it's good to note that Mercury is going to be moving towards the square with Pluto. We will talk about that next week when it comes through exact, so come back for that video for more information there. But this square may be that there's some discomforts that are highlighted and some sort of mental action that is required of us or asked of us or we're invited to participate in surrounding the physical and mental realms. So thinking about Taurus and Aquarius. And again, we've already had this square with Venus. We've already had this square with the Sun. Mars will come through the square as it moves into the sign of Taurus as well. So just know that we're in the process of these squares to Pluto here. That's what we have for this week. A lot of Venus. This week could feel pretty intense for some people. There could be a lot of emotions. There could be a lot of processing. So I think this is a good week to remind ourselves to take a deep breath. It's always a good time to remind yourself to take a deep breath and reorientate yourself to your breath. And that is exactly what we do at our live meditations. We remind ourselves of that connection to our breath. When we connect to our breath, we connect to the universe and to the environment around us. We always have our breath, right? As long as we are breathing, we have our breath, even if we forget about it. It's one of those autonomic functions of our body that just happens. You don't have to remind yourself to breathe like you have to remind yourself to eat or drink or go to the bathroom or, whatever other vital functions there are. Breathing happens automatically, just like your heart beats, right? Automatically. You don't have to tell your heart to beat. It may change the rhythm and whatnot, but you don't have to start it. You don't have to initiate it. Your breath is the connection to the universe. So if our breath is the connection to the universe and we're always breathing, we're always connected to the universe, even if we forget it, even if the separation illusion that is there pulls us away from it because we are thick within the material realm in some sort of way. So come to the meditation with us. Join us Sunday nights, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Come back next week. We'll walk through another week together astrologically, and we will walk this journey of life together here. Again, if you've made it to the end of this video and you haven't already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll get notifications so you don't have to necessarily check back. All right, I hope everybody has a wonderful, great week. I will see you all next time. Take care, take a deep breath, and I'll see you next time.